Thank you all for being here, and I won't say the welcome because it'll come from more people, but I'll just like to call up to the stage the three people who are going to be speakers today. So firstly, Mr. Wajahat Habibullah, if we can give him a hand and thank him for coming. Marshal Philip Rajkumar, can give him a hand too. And Aruna Roy from the School for Democracy. And there is another person who should be up here, but he's not keen to be up. He'll be all around and he'll welcome everyone. And that's Aroma Revi, who is the director of this institute.
Thank you, Nikhil. So very glad to have you here. You're at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, and we're especially glad that we are being able to host the second lecture. Last year we had Admiral Andas here, and today I think we have Mr. Habibullah. Just very quickly tell you who you are and what we do. We are building a new, somewhat different institution here. We're building a national university that focuses on the questions of urbanization. This is a little different because, like we said, if this was in the 60s and the 70s, this would have been a public institution. But in some senses, the Indian state has sort of stepped out for good reasons from higher education in many places and focusing on school education, which is quite important. So we're building an institution in the public interest, but it's being supported by a whole range of people who, let's say, are not directly in the public sphere. We also work a lot with public institutions. We were just mentioning here very quickly. In the last 2 years, my colleagues and I have actually spent many weeks at the academy at Mussoorie. We've trained over 1,000 people from the service, from the IS, on urban questions. And for those of you who are from the armed forces, since last year we've been working very closely, especially with the army. This year we will be I just finished something about 3 weeks ago in Fort William. We were working with all the army commands. In fact, we were with Eastern Command earlier in the month, essentially trying to help the army and the other armed forces manage cantonments and military stations much better. There are lots of opportunities to do that. They're still some of the most protected places in the country, but there are lots of ways to actually improve that. So we work actively with public systems and with public institutions. And I think, for me at least, over the last decade or so, 3 of the most important innovations have been the right to education, which is now under some stress. There's some attempts to try and modify that. The right to food that didn't actually become something that's supported in the Constitution, and the right to information. So as an institution, as an institution that works on knowledge, I think the key thing is, of course, availability of information. We work a lot with that across the country, across many states, both training and educating people. But we have to move, from being able to gather information, which I think this right is very important, to actually being critical of it. And then what we teach our people here, young people and people in service, of how to use it to propose. Because it's not enough to be critical. Of course, you can't be critical unless you actually have the information in the first place. And India has a tremendous amount of information. It's just not sort of accessible. But we need to move from the availability to criticality, and finally to proposition. Because without proposition, the kind of work that Aruna and Nikhil do and have been doing for so many years, you don't actually develop agency. And without agency, no change can happen. So it's those multiple steps that, as an institution, we're happy to support. So we try and do whatever we can in small ways. And we're very glad to have you here. We typically have convenings in this place on our new campus, which we'll be building over the next few years, which bring across people of very different sort of persuasions and interests. So thank you so much for coming here, and over to Nikhil.
Thanks so much, Romar, and thank you to this whole institute, the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. For both years, they have been extremely welcoming. And without a thought, everyone in the whole institute has come forward to help, and help in a way that not only is this place given free, but all their people and everyone else have also supported us, and it's a lovely little place. Can you hear now at the back? You can. They were all complaining, Aruma, that you weren't keeping the mic close enough, and you must have spoken here 1,000 times. So, yeah, some people can come right to the front, because there are 2-3 seats here. I mean, not more than 2-3, but someone, anyway, Adhir, whoever comes, will you lead them here, please, so that. We are starting really quite well on time, which can only happen, I think, in an occasion which has part 4G sort of makeup. Aroma's grandfather and father, or grandfather? Both, grandfather and father were from the armed forces. Wajahat's father was from the armed forces. Aruna, well, we'll have to go to an uncle from the armed forces. And Air Marshal Rajkumar, of course, is from the armed forces. But we want to bring a topic to the armed forces and to national security and to defense establishment, which is not so common with the armed forces, which is public discussion and debate about issues that concern all of us. And so I will just briefly introduce the 3 speakers, starting with Mr. Wajahat Habibullah, who's a former civil servant. This is what he is given, and so I'll add a little bit of my own masala at the end of it. A former civil servant from the Indian Administrative Service who spent much of his career in Jammu and Kashmir, most of it in the Kashmir Valley. So really on issues of national security is an extremely important voice. He's also served on the staff of 2 Indian Prime Ministers, Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi, as Director and Joint Secretary respectively, and was an administrator of the Union Territory of Lakshadweep, held the post of Minister in the Embassy of India in Washington, D.C., Director Lal Bahadur Shastri, National Academy of Administration. Subsequently, he was Secretary in the Department of Consumer Affairs, the Ministry of Textiles, and Panchayati Raj. So as wide a range, but all those crucial places where we think national security and touch me not issues dealt with. After retiring from the service, Wajahat Habibullah served as India's first Chief Information Commissioner, heading the final court of appeal under India's Right to Information Act, which also, by the way, is the last and final body to decide whether any information at all should be in the public domain or not. So I think eminently qualified on both sides to having seen information within and what should come out in public domain. Chairman of the National Commission for Minorities, a former Randolph Jennings Fellow at the USIP, the United States Institute of Peace, from 2003 to 4. Wajahat has been awarded the Rajiv Gandhi Award for Excellence in Secularism. He is the author of My Kashmir, The Dying of the Light. He is also the son of Major General Inayat Habibullah, founder commandant of the National Defense Academy in Khadakwasla. So a very warm welcome and thank you. We could not, I think, have had a better speaker for this kind of issue that we are having, one of those who we are seeking for these kinds of discussions. Also welcome Air Marshal Philip Rajkumar, who is, for me, a childhood friend who I have seen for many years around. He served 40 years in the Indian Air Force, specialized as a test pilot, which is what Air Marshal Dey was as well. My father was as well. Served under him for 5 years. He retired, Air Marshal Philip Rajkumar retired as director of the ADA, the Aeronautical Development Agency. And many pilots are not just pilots, actually they are developers, they understand technology, and perhaps those who are in testing understand things to do with purchase and procurement and what we need, which are all big issues because they involve thousands of crores of our money. He spent 9 years at the ADA, during which he was responsible for flight testing of the prototype of the light combat aircraft and its technology demonstration program. He was intimately associated with the development of the first fly-by-wire flight control system for the aircraft. And that program has since then completed 3,500 flights without an accident, largely due to that foundation, which he was considered responsible for. So I think really an important, not just a pilot, but a developer and a developer of this country responsible for systems within that. In his service career, he flew 5,200 hours on 55 types of aircraft. So I think the next time you want to go on a new aircraft, we could request Air Marshal Rajkumar to take us all. He brings another voice to this discussion. There will be brief comments by him and Aruna Roy because perhaps Wajahat himself in his career has looked at one side of national security. Air Marshal Rajkumar has looked at another. And that part is also important, which all of us need to understand. Wherever our positions may lie, we may agree, not agree, but that's the kind of debate we want to foster here. The third is Aruna Roy, who is my colleague for 30 years. I can't say 44 years yet, but my colleague for 30 years. And Aruna served in the Indian Administrative Service for 7 years, from 1968 to 1975, then worked in a registered NGO for another, from 75 to 83, another 8 years. And from 87 onwards has worked with the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, a peasant and workers organization, self-funded, community-based, non-party, but believes in democratic political processes. It believes that all of us need to participate, need to have a voice, need to express ourselves, need to engage, and not just sit back. So that she has, of course, as all of you know, played a leading role she's played a leading role along with many of us in many of the things that have happened in the Right to Information movement and the movement for the Employment Guarantee Act. But because she was in the National Advisory Council, she and people like Jean Drèze had an opportunity to actually carry our voice in there and dig their heels in and not allow things to get diluted. And that's why we have had, to a large extent, as powerful a law as the Right to Information law that we've had. It was an opportunity which shows us, I think, when people's movements get a voice in government, what opportunities could exist. So it'll be great to have her here, not just as a host at School for Democracy, but also a person who will comment on this particular thing. Finally, I'd briefly like to say a little bit about my father, Air Marshal Dey. He was a person in the armed forces. I remember once him telling me that actually, I don't know, my father put me into the armed forces, put us, he and his brother. And I enjoyed flying and I carried on flying, but had I had a chance, I would have liked to design bridges. So, but he's someone who enjoyed his job a lot. And not only that, he was a very thinking person with all of us. So one of the things that we wanted to do is foster that kind of thought in his memory and have this connection between issues. He said, I know once, and that's left a deep impression on my mind, that there is a reason that the defense services are called a defense service and not an offense service. The idea is not to be offensive, the idea is actually to secure peace. And in that sense, he was certainly a thinking person, that you have to have a force that is not out there to disturb peace, but it is out there to actually secure peace so that the whole region can be stabilized. And he certainly thought that war would be destructive to all sides and all people. So that's a very difficult position to be in that and realize, and those are things that people like Marshal Rajkumar or so many others deal with. So it's that, in that memory, that we wanted to have a series of lectures on Right to Information, which he was totally supportive of from the time that we began. And he was supportive of it, and he would say to us each time, why only in the civil sector? Why not in a sector that concerns us also? Yes, there are areas that you won't look at, but most areas actually can be looked at, barring small operational areas. So that debate will continue. Thank you all for being here, because I think there is no way that this kind of event can take place without the presence of all of you. I know there are people here who are personal friends, so it's for me also a very different kind of atmosphere. I know there are people here who are interested in the issue, And I know that there are people here who perhaps in other occasions would not find themselves in the same room. So it's a great opportunity and a great challenge for the speakers. So I will now, if it's okay with you, like to welcome Mr. Wajat Habibullah, but with one quick thing, because I read out his CV as he gave it. I want to say that he is one of absolutely the most democratic people we have seen sitting in a chair. I've seen the worst criticism hurled on him, and smiling, not only smiling, people know how to smile without really smiling, but he has smiled, listened to it and said, no, let them say whatever they are saying, and maybe there is a point to it as well. And that is a very, very great thing to be able to have, and it was a great thing to have as Chief Information Commissioner. He, I think, was very, very good for that particular office, because he struck a kind of balance and he gave it the kind of sense of importance that that was required. There were many things on which we disagreed, but that was what he encouraged. He said disagreement is fine, we'll discuss the disagreement, nothing is taboo. And it's in that spirit that I welcome him to speak. There is a song. Okay, this is also quite unusual. This is the first time I think we played it in a public event. There is a song made by the government of India on the RTI. So we played all our songs shouting about government this way and that way. But this is a Press Information Bureau, I think, song made by, DOPT. DOPT, who was a sworn enemy for many years. DOPT song on the RTI. So that will be for 3 minutes, and then Wajat Saab will speak.
का दफ्तर, किसी गांव का अस्पताल हो या कोई बिजली घर, क्या हुआ क्या ना हुआ मालूम करेंगे, कैसे होता काम काज हम हक से जानेंगे, हम जानेंगे, हम हक से जानेंगे, हम जानेंगे, हम हक से जानेंगे, हम हक से जानेंगे।
हमारी और ये देश हमारा, the nara that we take it a little bit further, सरकार हमारे आपकी नहीं किसी के बाप की, so that's a bit too much for government of India, but the essence of it कि देश हमारा है, सरकार हमारी है, there are no holy cows. It's a dangerous thing to say these days, but there, and we need to ask about everything. What will come out we need to see, but so that's why these kinds of conversations. Please welcome Mr. Wajat Habibullah.
Marshal Dey, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I must say how deeply honored I am to have been asked to come and deliver this second Marshal Dey Memorial Lecture. I never had the privilege of actually meeting the Air Marshal, but his name, particularly in the profession that I was involved in, administration, the transparency and accountability, was a name to be reckoned with and admired, even from a distance. And although I never therefore met him, I feel deeply privileged that I'm asked to come and speak on this subject in his memory. Why this subject? Because I, along with him, believe that national security is not the security of structures or machines or even property. Security ultimately is the security of India's people. And therefore, what Nikhil said, the security of the people is best ensured not by making war, but by ensuring peace. देश हमारा है, सरकार हमारी है, ये तो सच है। लेकिन भारतवर्ष की जनता ये भी कह सकती है कि हम सरकार हैं, because we're a democracy. And that is why when Dr. Manmohan Singh, and I've quoted this in this text which I've circulated, that is in fact the text of what I'm going to say, but I will not adhere to that, I will speak to you on my own. But what he said was, this law was intended to bring in an era which will bring the common man's concern to the heart of all processes of governance. Mind you, all processes of governance. The common man's concern was supposed to be at the heart of all processes of governance. Now we have had this law for 11 years now. So the time has come for us to ask ourselves this question, that have we succeeded in bringing the common man's concern to the heart of all processes of governance? And the heart of that, obviously, will lie the common man's concern, which is primary, concern for his own and his family's security. And in this I have used a quotation of the Secretary General of the UN, former Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, where he describes the objective of ensuring information, access to information for all, what is actually public participation in governance, which should mean that. And what did he have to say? He said, the great democratizing power of information has given us all the chance to effect change and alleviate poverty in ways we cannot even imagine today. Mind you, great democratizing power of information. Our task, your task, is to make that change real for those in need, wherever they may be. With information on our side, with knowledge of a potential for all, the path to poverty can be reversed. So the ultimate objective of making information available to all and ensuring public participation in governance is to ensure that poverty, if not overcome, is certainly reduced. This was an objective of our previous government, which brought the law. This is again, and strongly reiterated after his recent election victories by our Prime Minister, by our present Prime Minister. गरीबों के लिए ये सरकार है. And the means to that end is information. Now you will, of course, naturally you will ask me, how do you say that? The law itself lays down that democracy requires an informed citizenry and transparency of information which are vital to its functioning, and also to contain corruption and to hold governments and their instrumentalities accountable to the governed. Therefore, in my view, a society, if it seeks to define itself as a democracy, has to have the people not only be able to access the right to information, but actually exercise the right to information. At the heart of this is, and I would not agree, when this law was first passed, Aruna and I shared a stage in which Aruna came up and said, like Madame Defarge, that the RTI Act has brought down the like seizing the Bastille. So I begged to differ, and I still differ, because, and this is what I would like to emphasize for those of us who have been in government, the RTI is a means by which the government can communicate with its own people. Otherwise, what is the means of communicating with your own people? Every representative of the people, and mind you, they are representatives of the people who are sitting in the assembly and who are sitting in parliament and who are manning the panchayats. Only representatives, not the people themselves. How do they interact? How do they communicate with the people who they are representing? Do they speak to them every day? Can they meet them every day? The panchayat has institutions like the Gram Sabha, but does the political leadership actually call those meetings? So while the people will get information from the government must learn from the people. And again, if I may cite our present Prime Minister, in the last annual convention which he presided of the Indian Information Commissions, which was last year, I think, he said, this is October last year, he said that the right to information should be made a means of monitoring the functioning of the ministry itself by each department of the ministry. And I'll tell you why, from my own experience. In my time, I've come across cases where access to information was sought on a particular subject, and one department of the same ministry says that this information is not accessible, it's exempted. I'll come to the exemption later. Is exempted under Section 8 of the RTI Act. The other department says, no, here is the information. So the person came to me in appeal saying that, well, the PIO, the Public Information Officer of the other department, has to be fined because obviously he's told me a lie. He's given false information, which is penalizable under the law, under Article 19 and Article 21. When I read the thing, what I found was there were two departments in the same ministry dealing with the same subject. And one had declared it to be confidential, the other said it's not confidential. So you see, now how does one become, you are communicating through the RTI. There have been cases where files have been traced. Mr. Jaswant Singh, our former minister, cabinet minister, he'd approached the Information Commission. He was a colleague of many of the people here. He also is an ex-serviceman, as you know. He was also a cadet of my father's, like you were. He asked for documents regarding the abolition of privy purses. All kinds of convoluted answers came as to why it could be given, why it could not be given, how it's to be found, and so on. To cut a long story short, what was found was the files, the cabinet papers regarding that were in the cupboard of the then Joint Secretary of the Ministry of Home Affairs, who'd called for the file to answer a Parliament question. And when the question had been answered, the file went back into his cupboard, and then he was transferred, so they never found their way back to the archives. So all we came up with was letters between the archives and the Home Ministry saying, this file has gone, now these files have been sent to you. The Home Ministry said, they've been sent to the archives, we have nothing further to do. And the archives traced a letter to the Home Ministry that here are the papers which are sent to you. And then, well, fortunately, our systems are good enough that the papers are still preserved. The cupboard was still there in the record room. It still had the same number which it had at the time of the Joint Secretary, so those files could be traced. But this is how the government is functioning. We in the government would like to sit and say, well, the government is the best, we function the best, you should all learn from us. Okay, I will even concede that, but please learn from yourself. And who are the people who will teach you? From who will you learn? It is the people. And the people, through the right exercise of the right to information. So this has gone a long way in this direction already. The key question in ensuring this interaction, is therefore transparency and accountability. As you know, even the present government, as part of its manifesto in the elections, the BJP had called for transparency and accountability. Since then, the government has introduced several measures like Man Ki Baat and so on. But the criticism that is made there is that although we all know, we all now are able to have access to what is in the Prime Minister's mind, what we would like to convey to him is what is in our mind. So therefore, the point that I'm trying to make is the RTI, in order to achieve its full objectives, must be interactive, must be an interaction. The flow of information from and to government, because that is democracy. It cannot be one-sided. Let me give you an example of how this is not happening and the consequences. You all know of what has happened in Chhattisgarh in the last few days. You know the Maoist movement. The Maoist movement was described by our former Prime Minister as the greatest threat to our security, the national security. The Maoist movement is a movement from among the poorest sections of our society. This answers the question which I put to you earlier also, as to how far we have moved in actually reducing poverty. But this very fact of the Maoist movement also should demonstrate that a great political awareness has grown among the Maoists. But what has that led them to? And this has primarily affected the tribal areas. And you know this great arc of this Maoist movement, extending right from Nepal down our east coast into central India. How is it that it is spread among poor, otherwise backward, less educated sections of our society? because they are seeing that what is theirs by right, even protected under the British Draconian Forest Act, which expropriated what was till that time the property of the tribes, which were the forests, to government, but had preserved for the tribals the minor forest produce, which was the source of their livelihood. They found this being exploited by multinational corporations, their lands being mined by the rich and the powerful, and they getting no other benefits than daily labor wages. So, you had the resurgence of a Naxalite movement. But look at it the other way. The objective there is exactly the same. What they have been moving towards is to see that the government, which they consider party to this exploitation, and has not been sharing the benefits which it has been obtaining from the exploitation of the forest rights with them, they want it to be accountable. And what is Ms. Aruna Roy asking for? She's also asking, please be accountable. This is what she was asking when she initiated this whole movement. That the poverty alleviation programs, please let us know how much you've paid. So tribals, the Maoists are doing the same thing, ultimately the same objective through violent means. And you have another means. And already in the tribal areas, the government has a more sophisticated method of local self-government, taken from Panchayati Raj, called PISA, Extension to the Scheduled Areas, Panchayat's Extension to the Scheduled Areas Act. This law is not even in operation in many of the tribal areas. The tribals don't even know of this law. So then, they feel that this government is not going to give them anything. But if that information is with them, and they can ask, then the government will be forced to respond. You've seen what has happened in Kashmir recently. An entire young generation, children from the age of 10 to 20, an unprecedented uprising in the valley based on misinformation. You will have heard what they're complaining of. Of course, there are the general complaints, you know, that the resolution has not been there, and the accession to India is doubtful, and so on and so forth. But what happened? Why was there this outburst? Because recently, the government of J&K has come up with measures to allot lands for the resettlement of ex-servicemen. Now, the resettlement of ex-servicemen was not in violation of their resettlement laws, of the J&K resettlement laws. It is only for ex-servicemen hailing from the state of Jammu and Kashmir. But what do the young people make of it? They assumed this law means that people, ex-servicemen from all over the country are going to be brought and settled in Kashmir, and they will be then used to keep us down, keep us under control. Not even true. A simple RTI application would have answered the question. Nobody, although there is a fairly vibrant movement there. And in March of last year, I had been to J&K. I had been to this very area, South Kashmir, where there has been this upsurge of violence, and spoken with the patronage of the local administration to all the service people, that this is what RTI can do, this is what you can achieve, this is how you can reach out through the RTI. But it's still nascent, and before the political leadership could actually reach out, or the administrative leadership could reach out, you had that encounter which resulted in this upsurge. But my point is that these are all factors which can, given the exercise of this right, maybe cause disturbances, but not result in violence. In my written lecture, I have given the example also of 2611. 2611 is a very good example. We all know, I don't need to go into the details, of the delayed response that took place, the lack of coordination between the different agencies, the fact the public didn't know where to go. One station master in the Chhatrapati Shivaji station saved the day by telling people what to do. Had he not spoken, there would have been even greater chaos. But the terrorists were able to then take the lives of several policemen, senior officers. It was a tragedy of great measure. And then the media was showing television shots of where this relief columns were coming, which gate they were entering from, where the helicopters are coming, and who was watching all those? The handlers of those very terrorists. So this is a better example. I was told you about how in the Maoist movement and in this movement among the children, sharing of information by government could have helped. In this case, both factors are there. Sharing of information which would be useful to the public by the government, but ensuring from the side of the public that it do not intrude onto information which obviously its exposure is a security hazard. In fact, the attack in Nariman House, in which the Jewish community of people were killed, is directly ascribed to this fact that while they were trying to reassure their captors, on the television they were seeing all the programs about how people were trying to come in. So they murdered the people inside. So all these things, this is where we can act in bringing this right to making this right to information alive. Now people will say, and it is a fact, that when this law was first passed, the army had grave objections to the law being applied to the army, to the security forces. And a huge delegation from the defense ministry, a number of lieutenant generals and major generals came to see me, came to see the commission, and said that, look, we should not be there because most of the work of the defense forces, if it is disclosed, it will amount to compromising our defense. Today, among the most effective ministries in handling applications for the right to information is the defense ministry. You don't find major scandals revolving around the defense ministry being disclosed in consequence of RTI disclosures. Finance ministry, other ministries, yes. Banks, yes. But not the defense forces, because they have developed a system whereby, without disclosing, without compromising security, they're able to answer questions. And what happened? Most of the questions that were there in the army happened to be matters concerning personnel. Why was so-and-so posted there? Why did so-and-so supersede me? Which the army has no hesitation in answering. There were, of course, a few cases like the ex-servicemen who were supposed to, the Kargil martyrs who were supposed to get accommodation in Mumbai, and it went off to all kinds of other people. But then you will all agree with me that such exposure was good exposure, valid exposure, and certainly enhanced the respect of civil society for the military forces, for the security forces. And the security forces were also able to handle it by being transparent and giving out the information that was necessary. The law already lays down quite clearly what is exempt from disclosure. And I will read that out. Information disclosure which would prejudicially affect the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security, strategic, scientific, or economic interests of the state in relation with any foreign state or lead to incitement of an offense. Information is expressly forbidden to be published by any court of law, tribunal or disclosure which may constitute contempt of court, information including commercial confidence, and so on, information available to a personal fiduciary relationship, information received in confidence from foreign government, information which impede the process of investigation or apprehension or prosecution of offenders, information which relates to personal information, disclosure which has no relationship to any public activity. Where practicable, part of a record can be disclosed. In other words, security, military security, personal security, social security, all these are exempt from disclosure. So if it is properly handled, if the persons responsible for actually disclosing the information are well versed in the law, unfortunately, it has been found that it is not always so. I have found in a number of cases information which need not have been disclosed has actually been disclosed, causing embarrassment to the government or worse. So if this is properly handled, then there should really be no need for any apprehensions with regard to disclosure of information. Although there's a second schedule to the law which has kept certain departments out of the coverage of the RTI law. In my view, these clauses of the RTI Act in themselves are enough. They did not have to also go ahead and exempt certain departments. The CBI, to start off with, was open to disclosure. When suddenly after I retired, in fact, they've made that one of the scheduled departments, and of course I'd written a long letter to then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh protesting this, but that didn't really make any difference. It continues to be exempt. But it's my view that you don't really need to exempt. And this view was agreed upon by a former director of CBI, agreed upon by the Director General of the paramilitary forces, who came and met me and talked to me about this. Because matters of personnel, promotions, postings, these sort of things are the kinds of applications which they get. Are you compromising security by disclosing those? Or are you in fact compromising security by not disclosing them and creating resentments within your forces? The key element here is to make this real. Now, I've been telling you that this can happen, this can happen, and as I said to start off, a certain degree of progress has been made, but not enough. There has been a study that has been done, which I've referred to in my written lecture, in 2008, by two outstanding NGOs who actually got into the whole detail, and there have been studies after that also. But that broadly laid down how this was developing. In the urban areas, the awareness and the use of the law had spread rapidly. In the rural areas, not so much. In the urban areas, NGOs had been very active, the media had been very active. In the rural areas, NGOs have been less active, probably because access is not always so easy, and the media hardly present. But in the rural areas where the heart of the problem lies. In the urban areas, because of the access to the administration, to all levels of the administration, the population has better means of ensuring their own security than in the rural areas, where exploitation still exists and where people do not so readily find relief from these threats to their security. So I have of course suggested, and as Secretary in the Ministry of Panchayati Raj I had already suggested, but now after being Chief Information Commissioner I had even more strongly suggested, that the panchayats be made the more effective means of actually ensuring security by making such information available. Now, Arunaji has done a lot of work in this regard, but at present it has covered only certain areas, certain parts of the country. These states which I have mentioned to you, where, for example, Kashmir, in the rural areas, the dissemination of information has not been existing, and it's from the rural areas that this outburst of violence occurred in the recent past. In the Maoist areas, again, in the rural areas, I have mentioned to you that the PISA is not effectively implemented. The government has taken recourse to trying to control the Maoist movement through military and police means. In Jammu and Kashmir, these stone pelters were charged with these bullets, these pellets, which blinded a lot of children. But in both cases, it was sought to remedy the problem through measures of security, through the law and order mechanism. The law and order mechanism in such a situation obviously has to be used. But it cannot be used by itself, because suppression alone will not bring resolution, particularly if you have been encouraging, and all of us, all of you have been encouraging people to exercise their rights. Now when they say now we're exercising our rights, so you start opening fire. Now the point is you exercise your right, but not by throwing stones or not by shooting and killing. But first you must find that by exercising your rights you are getting a resolution. You don't start turning, these young children didn't start picking up stones the moment that somebody said no. They started after a prolonged period of denial. The Maoists have turned to the gun after a long period of exploitation, after seeing, ironically, India progressing on every front. They see it on their television, they see it in the cinemas, they see it written about. The great rate of growth of our economy, the great achievements. Some of the wealthiest people in the world springing from our country. And they're as they were. So the education that they have been provided with has itself helped to work in nurturing this resentment. Because the destination, the consequence of that education should have therefore meant that they could also have been getting access to greater information. But they've been educated so they can read and write and understand, but they are not given the information which will help them to understand better. So these are the means by which we can use this right to information. Not necessarily the law itself, the law has these provisions. But what is required is an environment of freedom, and the freedom which we look for is the freedom of information. This is something that this law encompasses, yes, but I put it to you, it is very much a part of our civilization before the onset of imperialism. What did the Buddha teach? And this message I have heard repeatedly from the lips of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In Nalanda, as you probably know, there are squares, openings in every enclosure where students were supposed to sit and question their gurus. And the gurus were supposed to answer. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama also says, please ask questions. It is my duty to answer. And I'm not worthy of my position unless I can answer. So, we in the government, in the security forces, should make ourselves worthy of answering, which means we must master the reasons why we need to keep things secret. Obviously, there will be things that need to be kept secret. An orderly government can't run with complete anarchy. There are certain things that have to be kept out of the public domain, but they have to be considered. What is that? And you have to consider what should be made public, and what should be made public should be readily accessible to the public. The government today has no such proper policy. I doubt if the military also has, whether this matter has been thought out. But it is time for us to do that thinking inside government, because as we grow as a democracy, we have to accept the fact that the public will need to participate in that whole process of governance. If it does not, the foundations of our democracy will begin to crumble. So I would be happy to take any questions and to allay any doubts if I can, and also then to be righted where I may have wronged. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Wajahat. There's lots that you have said to us, and I'm sure there'll be responses from the comments that we're going to make, and from people who want to know more, or agree or disagree with you, which is what you've spoken for. May I now request Air Marshal Philip Rajkumar to please offer his comments, not necessarily only on what Wajahat has said, but what you may feel about security in the armed forces.
Mrs. Asha Dey, ladies and gentlemen, I have known Mrs. Asha Dey and late Air Marshal Dey for many, many years, Mrs. Asha Dey for about 45 years, and I thank you, Asha, for inviting me to speak here this evening. After that brilliant exposition of the RTI Act 2005 by Mr. Habibullah, I will start with my personal experience of the RTI Act. Behind my house, a gentleman demolished his house and started putting up apartments. And he did not respect the laid down bylaws for setbacks. And his rear wall came up to within 3 feet of my back wall. So I went and spoke to him, and he said, all right, since you're objecting, I'll move it back to 6 feet, though the setback was 6 feet 6 inches. And on either side, he didn't respect it, neither had he respected it in front. So I put in an RTI application. I went to the BBMP office with a postal order of 10 rupees and put in an application asking for his building plan. Pat came the reply within the stipulated period of 30 days that you have not mentioned the ward number in your application, so we cannot action your application. So I found out the ward number, went back again, but I also took the precaution of going to a retired KAS officer, Karnataka Administrative Service officer, who had worked in the BDA, and he helped me to get that plan. And I found that the sanction plan was for 7,000 square feet, where he had actually built 13,000 square feet. So, in spite of my complaining to all the concerned BBMP authorities, the building has come up and people have occupied the building. But at least the ground, the first floor, which looks directly into my backyard, remains unoccupied. So I won a partial victory with my RTI application. The whole thing about the RTI is, even though information is made available, subsequent action by the bureaucracy is very, very tardy or non-existent. So that's one of the weaknesses of the RTI. As a former serviceman, what I'm very concerned about is India's nuclear weapon program. We went overtly nuclear in May 1998, and soon after that, in August 1998, Mr. Vajpayee made an announcement in Parliament that the Indian nuclear strategy will be based on no first use and massive retaliation in case of an attack. Okay, all very well. No first use has its own problems. When you say no first use, it also says no first use if attacked by a nuclear weapon state. A non-nuclear weapon state attacks India, then nuclear weapons will not be used. It's a very good high moral ground to adopt. But if you say no first use against a nuclear attack, you got to have something called second strike capability, which means that you got to have the means to survive the first attack and then retaliate. And retaliate in such a fashion that the enemy is neutralized, which means attacking probably all his major population centers. So all this requires a very, very robust command and control system, which is nuclear hardened. You need to have shelters which will cost thousands of crores to build, deep underground which can withstand a nuclear attack. And then what is called a decapitating nuclear attack is where the country's political leadership is all killed. Who presses the button next? Now, all this is part of the nuclear doctrine. The National Command Authority, we have a National Command Authority, but it is very opaque. It's very opaque. As a citizen, and especially as an ex-serviceman, I'd like to know what India's nuclear strategy is. How are we coping with this no first use and second strike capability? And now we have gone in for something even worse, which is a ballistic missile defense. Every other day you hear of Prithvi missiles being launched at Chandipur and intercepting incoming warheads. Now, this is all Star Wars. This is really Star Wars. If you think you can intercept all incoming warheads with your missiles, I think we are still not there technologically. If you remember, in the late 80s, President Ronald Reagan came out with his famous Star Wars program. And the Soviet Union bankrupted itself trying to cope with the United States, till Gorbachev came and some sense came and he called off the Cold War. At that time, the chief scientific advisor of the US president was asked, do you really think that the Star Wars will work? He smiled and said, if the President of the United States says it will work, who am I to say it won't work? So this is all political, and we are going down a road which is extremely expensive, fraught with all kinds of danger of escalation, nuclear escalation, and thousands of crores are going to be spent, and the common man, all of us, I'm sure none of us are even privy to what is going on in this regard. So I'm very concerned about India's nuclear program and its opacity. Mr. Habibullah has already spoken about the media and the role it played in the Mumbai attacks, but it continues. It happened in Uri, and it happened during the Pathankot Air Base attack. The Barka Datts and the Arnab Goswamis are so hungry for news that in the moment a terrorist strike takes place, they are there with their mics, sticking the mic into every local commander's face, expecting their comments. Surely the Indian public can wait 24 hours till the attack is over, and then they can be told what really happened. There's no need for live coverage of a terrorist attack. Lives are being put in danger, lives of the security forces are being put in danger, and I think this is something which needs to stop. As far as transparency in the defense forces is concerned, there is a need for greater transparency in the handling of personal affairs. Some 39 annual confidential reports were raised on me during my service career, and I did not get to read even one of them. So why is there so much difficulty in telling a man or showing a man his annual confidential report and say, this is where you stand? It just so happens that I was able to get along with all my commanding officers, and that's how I retired as an air marshal. But somebody should have told me where I stood all along the route. So with those few comments, I will stop here because Nikhil had said I had only 10 minutes. No, that's really all that I have to say. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. This was a very vital part of the input because what Vajadji has said, a lot of us talk about. What Air Marshal Rajkumar has said is not talked about that much. Our nuclear doctrine needs to be talked about, wherever we stand on it. What happens within the armed forces needs to be talked about. And that's what we hope in this lecture. There's another part of our family who's not here today, who's in the Air Force. They unfortunately can't talk. Air Marshal Rajkumar can talk. So we hope that in this series of lectures and through what we are, this is not the only place where it's being done, but it's being done very little. And I think even in this small group, a very strong message is coming out through that. So thank you, Air Marshal Rajkumar, for this. And we will, of course, here have the full question answer with Mr. Wajat Habibullah. But I'd like to call actually one of the hosts of today and a speaker who will make comments, Aruna, who I've already given an introduction to, but who is very vital to having this entire thing put into, I stand here as a family member, but Aruna is partly a family member, but actually someone who pushes for the institutionalization of these debates all the time. And I think it's extremely important. She was very insistent even this year that this happen and that it happen year after year. So I welcome Aruna to give her comments.
Thank you, Nikhil, and friends, for making it here. Actually, the main thing lacking in our polity today, and I think Vajahat has touched upon it quite seriously, is that we do not communicate. And I think ideas have ossified in our minds. We do not listen to anything but rigged news. We look at televisions which are so selective in what they show us. Newspapers are also selective these days. It's extremely difficult to know exactly what's happening in this enormously large country, which we call India. And the right to information law is being used between, I think, by 6 to 8 million users every year. And that is the unofficial and official records. There is always a discrepancy, but even 6 million is a huge number. And it's the only country in the world where the law is used by so many people. And though the figures of all the studies say that rural India doesn't use the law, I think it may not be that true, because the figures that are taken are not figures at the panchayat level. Nobody looks at who asks for information at the panchayat level, at the ration shop, at the local PHC. We don't have figures for it. Because why should we have figures for them? They don't matter really. What matters is what goes up and what are high profile. I think this is the malaise of collecting information. So information, there are many debates, not only the information should access, but what kinds of information actually get to see the light of day. And actually, it's very interesting that in all this, so many false dichotomies are raised. And we spend all our time arguing within those false dichotomies. We never really know what the facts are. There have been so many instances, I'll bore you to tears if I carry on with them, but there are so many instances, whether it's from the grassroots level to the top level. I remember in the early 90s, everyone was told that, oh, you know, India, we must build a temple in Ayodhya, and there are so many Muslims in this country. And I asked my literate friends, what percentage do you think of India's population is Muslim? And they said 25%. And I said to them, have you looked at the facts? Do you know how many there are? Even today, all these myths that are floated, so many myths are generated and floated. We need facts. We need facts to understand the human condition. We need facts to understand democracy. We need facts to understand policy. We need facts to understand governance. We also need facts to understand where we are wrong or right. and with this enormous displacement that's taking place with this new development paradigm that's come to us, where land is being acquired, waters are being taken away, massive displacement and mass displacement is planned. People have a right to know why this kind of planning, why not something else? Why should their hamlets and their small living abodes and their small patches of agriculture go for something from which they will simply not benefit? As my friend Chunni Singh, who's second class, that's all he's passed, not even the second class. He's self-taught and literate. He's one of the most brilliant minds I have ever come across. And he was invited, I don't know if you saw that slideshow, to address the students on public policy who'd come from the National Law School in Bangalore. And he came to address them. We had a series in which every group was addressed by a person who's intelligent, with great understanding of politics, but not literate in the technical sense, who came and spoke to them. And I remember Chunni Singh asking them, they asked him, oh, what do you think about policy for poverty? And he said, I want to ask you something. He said, my politics is from standing in the village Chopal and listening to people talking, and they're all saying that there's going to be a bullet train. He said, do you know how much it costs? They didn't know, he knew. He told them exactly how many millions it would cost. And he said, do you know how many people will get work for that amount of money? And he asked them, do you think you'll sit in that bullet train? Many of them said, no. He said, I certainly won't. And why should I not be party to a decision whether that money should go on a bullet train or go on Manrega? If there is corruption, we fight it. But you can't deny us our right to live. So it's not at all a matter of whether you're literate or not, whether you're here or there, whether you're urban or rural. I think India has plenty of extremely intelligent people and dedicated people. The point is we need access those facts, and we need a platform where we can place that information and lobby. Most of the cases which we lose, like you said now about not getting action on unearthing transparency records and making it transparent, is because we do not have a platform to lobby. In Bangalore, should have a citizens' council or a citizens' group that should take up every single issue that comes up, which is a violation of the laws. And I'll see how many people get to build their 13 floors and their big buildings. They can't. Individual battles have a limit. So when we talk about public force, we do need platforms. I'm quickly going to go through everything. I think there's a lot to say, but there's very little time. And I'm very glad that Wajahat's very brilliant talk this evening took up all the controversial and contentious issues. He's a mild person and I'm not, but I think that metaphor of Madame Defarge is where Madame Defarge is actually the government. And the guillotine is in their hands, and it's not in our hands. And now we're just saying to them, you keep the guillotine aside and let's have a public battle on whether you're right or we are right. So give us the facts. So I think you got the metaphor slightly wrong. But apart from that, I agree with everything you said, more or less. So in Chhattisgarh, my friend Bela Bhatia, a PhD from Cambridge, who studied and did her entire PhD doctorate on studying Naxalites, continues to live there. She is against all violence. She does not believe that violence should be perpetrated either by the extremists or by the state. And that's reasonable. Now, every time a case of violence on poor people is mentioned, they will say, oh, these are these human rights activists who have nothing to say about what's happened with the poor constables or policemen or the military. They only have something to say about people. But when there is the state, and the state has power, it fends for itself. Every constable or serviceman who loses his life gets taken care of. There are hundreds of people, thousands actually, who are mowed down and buried, and we don't even know that they've ceased to exist. So in a sense, where there's an imbalance of power, you speak more for the ones without power, and less for the ones who already are in power. Similarly, on every single exercise, let me give you specific examples of from where Wajahat was speaking. Finally, what made Bela's life secure for the time being, I can't even guarantee that she will have security, when a gang of 20 men went to her house and said, "Get out this minute. And if you don't, you will rue the day." She had contacts, so she rang up the collector. And then Kaluri, who was the superintendent of police, I don't know, I mean, if you followed that, used extremely abusive language, and therefore Kaluri was replaced. But not every superintendent of police will be so foolish. He may not use the language, but he might act much more cruelly. So in a sense, when you look at these situations and you go through these histories, you find that the battle is between the powerless and the powerful. And what Right to Information is actually asking is for equal power. It's dismantling those power centers. With Bela's case, in Bela's case, we were able to dismantle that power center and to understand something about the misuse of power, and therefore Bela is now protected. But there are hundreds of people in Chhattisgarh. If you ask a question on corruption, you're declared a Naxalite and put behind bars. Himanshu, tortured and made to come out of Chhattisgarh. Soni Sori. What happened to Soni Sori? What did she do wrong? She's not a Naxalite. She just asked about misuse of power. You ask about misuse of power, you're a Naxalite. And poverty, if anyone speaks for the poor, then you're a Naxalite. And I haven't shown you that photograph where Nikhil and I live in a village hut. If we live in that hut, and we've lived there for many years now, you are Naxalites. Who else will go and live in a mud hut? So if you're there, then you're a Naxalite. If you talk about land issues, you're a Naxalite. If you talk about poverty today, you're a Naxalite, because you shouldn't talk about it. And in Gujarat, if middle-level farmers have got together to say land should not be acquired, and some of them are right-wing farmers, you know, they're not left, they have been declared anti-state. You know the case of Hardik Patel. He's been declared an anti-national, has anti-national designs on the state. So when this kind of fabric of governance exists, we certainly need to know what the government is planning. They don't give information about issues on which there will be contention and where there will be questioned. In Kashmir, the Right to Information movement is strongest. One of the strongest movements is in Kashmir. It's an excellent movement. In fact, after the Right to Information movement started growing in Kashmir, I have had so much contact with the villages of Kashmir, and they've been able to get one very controversial issue where they got extraordinary success was the firing range in Toshi Maidan, which is up there at 8,000 feet. Huge, beautiful plateau, where that was the only grazing land for the people, that was the only place where they could go. It was full of bullets and whatever else you may have. Okay. So which blew in the faces of children. Children were killed, were maimed, animals died. They fought this battle through RTI and they won it in Kashmir, in Manipur. There are so many false encounters in Manipur, where young women, beautiful young Manipuri women, are widows, and they formed a huge association called the Association of Gun Widows. They call themselves Gun Widows. And when I went to meet them, they didn't know who we were, but they knew the RTI. And they said we use the Right to Information to access food, security, clothing, education for our children. That's what we use the RTI for. So in a sense, the RTI is a very powerful weapon to bring some kind of justice to people and therefore give them belief in democracy, belief in a kind of strength that they can use to arbitrate for justice within the system. Otherwise, there's none. Let's look at the whole history of Vinita Kamte, because you raised the issue of 2611, not 26, was it 2611? In Bombay. Kamte was a young, bright IPS officer who was killed in that conflict. His wife, Vinita, went to the Bombay police asking for information. He was declared a martyr. He was given a ceremonious funeral. All that happened. But Vinita went to the police station, and when she asked to see the records, she was denied the records. And the other senior officer was killed. His wife said in a public meeting in Bombay that her husband wore a bulletproof vest. And how did the bullet go through that? The material was rotten, it was low-grade material, there was corruption in the police system, then they wanted to see the Roznamcha, they were not shown the Roznamcha, they wanted to see the movement records which you have about where each one goes, and they both Kamte and the other person whose name is, I'm forgetting just now, is his senior, they kept ringing up the police station asking for support. And the calls were received, but no one went. So all these things would not have come out. She's written a very good book called The Last Bullet, if I'm not mistaken, To the Last Bullet, which I went to release in Bombay. And I met Vinita, a wonderful woman, courageous. She doesn't disbelieve in the system. She's not a Naxalite. She's not a Maoist. She doesn't want to destroy the system. She's not a terrorist. But this is the kind of actions that happens within governance. I won't go too far into it. There's so many other examples. But basically, governance, the word governance and what it means has been really unpacked by the right to information movement. Before this, we didn't know what it meant. Maybe people who were in the system knew. Maybe people like me, maybe who resigned, even I didn't know the full extent of it, did not know. What the right to information movement has done for the citizens of this country has unpacked governance. Because in that system of governance and in the delivery of that system of whatever services or whatever it delivers to you, lies my link to my sovereignty, to my constitution and my democracy. And if I don't have that link, I lose faith in democracy. If I lose faith in democracy, what do I become then? I can become anything. I can become a terrorist. I can become a person who believes in violence. I can believe anything. I can do anything. And that's what you have really pushed the people in Chhattisgarh and that entire area, and that's why they become Nakshals. If we do not want India to become and I think we are already half there, to become such a violent society, what we need to do is to dismantle these centers of power and give information. Recently, there have been so many issues. We went, not I, but somebody has gone to the RBI to ask about why demonetization. We have not been answered. Today, the government is more opaque than it ever was. Our right to information applications are not even received at many places. We don't have any platform to converse with ministers, with state governments, or the government of India. When we took out a yatra, very, very simple yatra, asking people really to use all the laws that they have, all the rights they have to access it, the Chief Minister's constituency in Rajasthan, Jhalawar, the innocent, simple demands and people were set upon by the sitting MLA, who charged on them with lathis, with a team of 15 to 20 young people, beat them up saying that they were Muslims, they were terrorists, they were this, they were Maoists. And why should a Muslim be just beaten up? Being a Muslim is not a sin. Being a terrorist is a sin, but being a Muslim is not a sin. Being a person who asks for rights is not a sin. They were set upon, they were beaten, and my colleague and very dear friend Shankar can't lift his left arm because when he was they were aiming at his head and he ducked. And he put his hand up like that, and his shoulder got it. That man, that MLA, is still not arrested in Rajasthan, despite the power we have, the contacts we have, everything we have. That file is lying on the Chief Minister's desk. And the police, the Chief of Police, the DGP has said that he is guilty. Records have shown they beat us up, they destroyed our cameras because we had friends who were coming with the tour to capture the film. The cameras were broken. That cameraman, my friend, also the editors of the film, were beaten so badly he couldn't put his leg down for days. And the police vamoosed from there completely, didn't even allow him to sit in the jeep. And finally today we stand demanding justice from the Chief Minister, and we have none. What would you call us? If we go and sit in Dharna, which we're going to do again, in another couple of months, we'll be back again in Jaipur. We will sit there on the streets and people will say, oh, these are destroyers of the peace. They come and disturb the city. They are this and that. But what else do we have? So in this country, where there is so much injustice practiced and there's so much double speak, information is vital. And without that information, I'm sure that all the members of the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan would have had false cases against them, millions of them by now. The only fact that saved us was that we had The right to information application proving that we wanted to know about panchayat records, wanted to know about the work site, wanted to know about cement bags, or whatever it was. So today, Wajahat's, he raised three. He raised about Chhattisgarh, he raised about Kashmir. Kashmir, since I've been there so frequently, there was a great demand from the young people, whoever came out. They wanted to come to India. They wanted to be part of the process. They wanted to join the colleges outside Kashmir. They wanted to be part of the theatre, a process of theatre building. They wanted to be part of so many things. They were becoming acquainted with and understanding democracy through the RTI, because the RTI people came to us. And what did we do to them? What we've done is really destroyed 10 or 11 years of hard work to build a society, to look at democracy as a possible alternative and a way of life to access justice. And today we really stand with 100 young boys who've lost their eyes, 1,000. 107 boys who've lost their eyes, and girls who've lost their eyes because of these pellet guns. Why should we have used pellet guns? And I know Uma is sitting here, I'm here, Wajahat is here, C.K. Matthew is here somewhere. And when we were trained, we were told that in a case like this, you aim to maybe, if there is a communal situation, you aim to kill one person. You don't kill everybody. You don't injure everybody. And you then say to them, you should be in my country and you shouldn't ask for azadi. Arey bhai, if I'm a member of your country, would you do this to your own child? If I'm your brother, would you do it to your own brother? To use pellet guns? And they're justifying this, and now pellet guns have started being used by the border security force in Assam, and they're justifying it. So I think there are fundamental questions that get raised, and right to information really helps us understand whether we are in the right or in the wrong. It's true that we may be asking absurd questions sometimes. We don't need to be asked. The right to information is also thrown up, not in toto, but a very good set of retired IAS officers, IPS officers, and also some very few people from outside in the information commissions. Wajahat has really done a yeoman's job in releasing what is famously called file notings on the left side of the page, which was where the cabinet secretary made a personal appearance to went and met everyone concerned to say, please do not show file notings. So when we sent the draft of the law to the government, from the NAC, they took away file notings, thinking, we've now got it. Cabinet had removed it. They thought, now we don't need to show our decisions to people. But Wajahat ruled, I think he should really say it himself, that what was your ruling, Wajahat? Just that one line. There's a mic there in front of you.
The law says that all such documents are disclosable. I simply said what the law said. No, I didn't give anything revolutionary.
No, but you just say what the law says, no?
Well, the law says that all kinds of notings, advice and everything is open to the public as part of information. It's under the definition of information. The government was free to change that law, did not have to have that definition under the definition of information. But the parliament had that in the definition of information. And in fact, some people said, but that's not the intention. I mean, whatever the intention, it was there in the law. So therefore, it becomes disclosable. I don't think I took a very heroic or very dynamic.
No, but you took what is called a correct decision, which was not influenced by prejudice, which was not influenced by fear, which was not influenced by any kind of negativity. Just a correct decision. And in fact, those officers who have been correct officers in the government have done a great deal of good for the country. But to be correct needs courage today in our country. You can't be correct because it brings the devil itself behind you, because you'll be transferred, somebody will go and write against you, you'll have a bad CR, so you toe the line. And the other great, there are many, but I want to mention one more, then I've talked too much, I'll end. The other important decision the commissions have given us, which is still hanging in no man's land, or if you like, in limbo, is the decision that was given subsequent to Wajahat when we had Satyanand Mishra as Chief Information Commissioner in Delhi, when he ruled on a petition or a complaint filed to him of supply of information by political parties, and request was made to define whether political parties were under the RTI law, and he ruled that they were, because they were public offices. They collect money from the people, so they should be under the law. Now that is hanging fire, because as soon as he decided, they, instead of going to the Delhi High Court, which they should have gone, went into a huge flurry, and they went off and they decided to change the law, and then it became a public issue, and we lobbied, and we got over 10 million signatures within a week sent to Manmohan Singh to say that if you do this, you've had it. Now the campaign is very strong, though it has got so many problems. We fight with each other, sometimes we quarrel so much that we don't eat with each other. There are 6 campaigns in each state, all that happens. But when these vital things happen, we so far have got together and been able to get things settled. When we did a meeting, now we are fighting for the accountability laws. Parliament has Whistleblowers Act, it has the Redress Act, Grievance Redress Act, it has many of these acts there. This government has simply not passed it. It should have just passed the whistleblower ordinance and made it into law. It sent it back, and now we have lots of problems. So anyway, just 3-4 things. When we asked some Dalits, time. Yeah, I know, I'm finishing. Give me 1 minute. I'm just tying the knot. So when we went and met some Dalits and asked them about accountability laws, they said, well, just remember 5 things. And they said it in Hindi. They said the first thing is, they said, everywhere there must be a sunwai. First of all, you should listen to us. Then there must be karwai. There must be some action. Then they said there should be bhagidari. We should be involved in the process of examination and evidence. Then they said jawabdehi. There should be accountability fixed. And finally they said we should have suraksha. We should have security. Because please remember that 60 people have been shot and killed for asking information in the last 11 years. They are the martyrs to democracy. So I'll end there, and I'll apologize since I've taken a little bit more time than I should have. So, Vajahat, I've cut into your time. I'm really sorry. Thank you.
So there's an interactive session, questions and answers preferably, or comments, very short ones. And then primarily with Vajahat Saab, but you can certainly ask also Air Marshal Rajkumar and Aruna.
The Right to Information Act is like an instrument to price information out of government. The fact is that we saw that video where there's a sea change, suddenly everybody is very cooperative and they are, it's not the case. It's really not the case. And for every case that Aruna quoted, you can multiply it many times if you take every district in this, where all kinds of things are happening. The thing is, what we need is a change in culture. Law is not going to solve the issue. We need a change in culture, and part of this culture of secrecy is a colonial, heritage. It is as stupid as saying that because we have a lot of accidents, we're going to change the law and make the law more stringent. What we need to do is to teach the people not to drive like lunatics. What are we doing to change the culture? Because it is just the same. I have retired from the government. I go to government office. I hate to throw my weight around. And I am sent from pillar to post. I find that with the passage of time, processes are becoming more complex, not simplified. With IT, it should be simplified. It's not. So what are we doing to change that culture? And unless that culture is changed, all law is of very limited applicability. Thank you.
My suggestion is we take 4-5 together, and then Vajahat Saab, is that okay? So that we get 4-5 people from, yeah. The next one, that's it.
Sure. I'm Alok. I'm an advocate, and I worked on legal policy issues in Delhi. I had just one question. Since the topic is RTA and national security, and as we have rightly sort of questioned whether these things are contradiction or not, I would sort of, because we have a good mix of both people with experience in the armed forces and in the government, I just want to wonder, how do we essentially define national security? Because I think at the moment, national security is being used as a slogan rather than any meaningful concept. So if we could come up with something that says this is national security sufficiently narrowly so that the RTI still has meaning, what would that be? That's it.
So do we take two and then, yeah.
Hello.
Take this one.
So the mic is fine, and voice activity.
Hello. My question is actually for all the three speakers because Mr. Wajahat Habibullah also spoke about the Bastar areas, the Naxalites, and the state that they're in, and how the government is actually seems to be fearful of them. And even Aruna Roy spoke about the Naxalites, the villagers, how they are actually, the fear is that they are going to there'll be uprising, they'll become violent, they're called terrorists. And why I'm talking about this is actually in the middle class homes. I'm with Swaraj Abhiyan, an organization that's working here in Bangalore. Middle class colleagues of mine have asked me, I mean, they actually have had a fear that the people from these places, Bastar, Chhattisgarh, etc., whether they're going to become violent and attack the middle class people at some point of time. I've never lived in those areas, but all of you have, so that's why I'm just asking you this question, because these fears are voiced many times to me. So I just want to get the answer from you.
Successive governments over the past decade, or almost since the RTI Act it started, there's been this systematic erosion of all the provisions, and governments have actually tried to do a kind of a non-cooperation movement. And it's in their interest to ensure that there is no RTI Act, let's say, in 5 or 10 years. Do you think it's even conceivable that we go back to, let's say, 11 or 12 years ago when there was no RTI Act in the near future, 5 years, 10 years from now? Can it even happen?
Shall I speak?
Whoever wants to go first.
I'm Somshekar from Grahak Shakti, a consumer organization. I've been part of this RTA movement from 2005. So I don't want to elaborate on a kind of this thing. Our experience on RTI has been totally miserable. I come to a specific point on Aadhaar, where we have asked the government, it's a compromise on national security, where documents reveal that a dubious kind of deal has happened. And up to CIC has given that the document has to be given. It has gone to the court is still pending, Supreme Court orders are still pending, government has bulldozed, all the government, the ex-government, the present government, everything has bulldozed. The act has come, and how the money bill, all that I don't want to go, I think the audience is aware. So, the fight is between those who have operated this. You know, we can dole out millions and 60 million, 70 million questions. I know for certain in a civil supplies department. In fact, Vajat Habibullah, I know him quite well because he's connected with the consumer movement also in a different way now, with Bijan Mishra. Now, one point I'll just complete, and then I wanted to ask Aruna Roy specifically one question. The question is, I know for certain that 65 lakhs has been drained, is gone through a corrupt means, by corrupt official. I wanted to go through the route of RTI to get that information. It is 1.5 years that I've been roaming around and around, but I've not been able to strike at that because they don't want to give that information. So the corrupt keep on hiding. You have to tirelessly go after them. You have to go through all this. And so that brings us to the final question, which today the movement of open government partnership is there, where 66, 70 countries have signed up, and involvement of civil society in partnership with the government on policy matters, which you know very well that you have participated also. India is one of the kind of organizations in the Southeast Asian countries where it is eligible in terms of whatever poverty elevation and all that, still not been able to implement this open government partnership. And I think you are aware and you participated in a training program also. Why is it that civil society cannot pressurize the government? We don't have a Lokpal. Anna Hazare sat for this thing, and you did it recently. You went and asked why no Lokpal has been appointed. They will not appoint. So they want the right person in the right place for them to be protected. So if this goes on and on and on, tirelessly, how can anybody work without a political system? If you are in politics, then you are sidelined, like what happened to Arvind Kejriwal, what happened to Yadav and all that. If you are in the political system, you get into the rot. If you're not in the political system, you can't make any change because concerted effort is not there. I just want you to throw a light.
Last one, and then we can take the next round after.
I'm a Marshal Harish Masan. A very short comment for consideration of the panel. I personally suspect that, and of the opinion that transparency in defense services and its effect on national security is essentially because the lack of shall I say, a higher defense management organization. As a matter of fact, we've destroyed the organization over the years from what we inherited at independence from the British, because culturally we like to work as one-man shows, with power in one man's hand. And what you see earlier in terms of Kargil and our reaction to Pathankot or whatever is clearly an indicator of how we react to these situations because of the lack of an organization and a lack of a shall I say, defined national security policy even after 70 years of independence.
Well, thank you for those questions, and of course I'll answer first, and then I'd request the others also to answer, because the questions are simply a little wider than what I myself will be able to. The question of, if I may start with the question that you raised regarding the culture.
You have to keep it really close to you.
If I may start with that question regarding the culture. Yes, but this is the difficulty. I was trying to project this in my presentation from the point of view of an ex-government official. One who had to, for most of his career, on the side where he had to give information, and at the end of that career have to see that people got the information. But you're right, the society, the law itself is not going to make a change in culture. And the question that came up later, that does it mean that every government has resisted this? The point that I wanted to make was that it is in the government's interest to share that culture. And I repeatedly, I think, emphasized the fact that this is the right to information law is a means of establishing and promoting a communication, a system of communication between the government and the people. Because in a democracy, it is the people who are ultimately the government. And I emphasize that point, that these are all representatives. It's not working. I mentioned that there has been some progress, but that progress is very limited. And I think this is borne out throughout in the discussion that was there and the questions that have come also. The progress is very limited from the point of view of the larger objective which we have. And of course, the question that was raised that let us define what is security. And security, defining security, I think I tried to give it a broader sort of a scope. That the objective has to be, the objective of a functioning democracy has to be the alleviation and elimination of poverty. So anything that accentuates the movement towards poverty is something that compromises democracy and therefore is compromising to the security of the poorest man. So that is why I tried to place this question of security as security of the people of the country. And then tried a little further to mean how did that security arise? That means a person has to be financially, socially, politically secure. And how can that be if I'm suffering from poverty? So that is the broader sense in which I tried to define the question of security. The question was raised regarding, and I think I'll leave that to Aruna to talk about, but the point that you have all raised, and you also have raised that point, that although we've had this law for 11 years, it is not working in the way that it should be working. And my point is, it is because it is not regarded as in a means of promoting governance. In my view, it is a means of promoting governance, not to put government out of the defensive, but allow government an opening of actually working with the public, and the public the opening of actually working in governance. If the law is to be successful, I did end with this, that unless we realize that, there is no future for the law. Yes, and the question that was raised there, that we, after all if it becomes simply processes and procedures, then you will revert to what the situation was in 2005. It is a fact that the mindset has not, I mean, there have been changes in government, and I've mentioned that in my note also, that the kind of changes that have taken place. The government's manner of actually keeping records has improved. But keeping records is one thing, and accessing the records is another thing altogether. Sharing, that's why I specifically cited the question of Man Ki Baat. That is a means of disclosing information, taking people into confidence. But it doesn't become complete unless the people can also then ask you that this is what we want to know. Thank you for this information, but what about this, this, and this? So that is not happening. And what role India can play? Potentially, you see now with all our laws and things, we can be a world leader. Our law has been recognized and is described as one of the foremost laws of its kind in the world, and it has great strength. The greatest strength of our law, I might mention, however, is the fact that you have people who have owned it. And that is what holds the promise in meeting the kind of question that you raise. Had we left it only to government, and unfortunately, that is the case so far as South Africa is concerned, so far as Bangladesh is concerned, who in many ways have stronger laws than we have in India. They extend right into the private sector. But there is no public, and as Aruna brought out, 8 million, 6 million or 8 million, millions of people are participating in this law. Millions of people are taking interest in this law. Ultimately, what will that mean? In a political system which expresses itself, in a democratic system which expresses itself through regular election, an election process, it will start having its effect on the election process. So it is time for the government to draw its lessons. Because then moving forward, as more and more people become aware of it, more and more people take the lead in this. Now, Aruna mentioned, of course, how government, and this happened repeatedly, that government decided to amend the law. It will amend the law. It has not been able to amend the law at all. At best, it has been able to amend rules and so on. It is also true. I don't know, I can't vouch for this. It's not for me to say also. It's for people who have not been involved in its implementation to say as to whether the law has been eroded
since it was first implemented, or has it become stronger? My view, it has become stronger. Why do I say that? Because a much larger number of people is now actually participating in it. I mean, if it is a useless law, if it was not delivering at all, then why would you have more and more people actually coming along and actually seeking information under this law? More and more people have become aware of the fact that we have this right to information and we can actually use it. In the rural areas also, when I said it's not being used, in certain sections it is. In certain sections it is a subject to widespread use. In certain sections it is not. And I know for a fact that in the rural areas of Kashmir it is not. And part of the reason for the present disaffection is because they don't know. It is still finding its roots there. Also in the Naxal areas, Naxal affected areas, it has not been widely used. Therefore, I'm trying to show and trying to guide for a way forward that those who are concerned about these areas, please try and see that the knowledge and the consciousness of its use spreads to wider areas. And part of the exercise in talking to all of you is, if you feel that there is this culture, now you know that if there is such a culture, it is something that militates against the law. And the law is there to strengthen your hands in working against that culture. And it's time that we moved out of the colonial mindset. It is time that we moved forward. Unfortunately, there are many hangovers of the colonial structures which are still there, including perhaps our service. But never mind that. The fact is that we don't have to abandon that tradition, but we have to change it. And this is a means of bringing about that change. And otherwise, the right to information has been part of our Constitution. The Supreme Court has held that is part of Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. Freedom of information is part of the freedom of speech. But no, now you have a law actually codifying that right. But even that is not going to be enough, but that will help in understanding. The more we understand, the more we... And therefore, and I said earlier, and I've repeated it just now, and I will again say, if the public owns the law, as it largely has, then doesn't it become the responsibility of the public to tell others that, well, there is this law, use it? And if the law is not used, the point that Aruna made about the 13 flaws, if somebody is not getting justice even after having acquired the proper information, then the citizenry can stand up and say, well, these are the facts. And therefore, there is a move, like the Whistleblowers Act, the grievance redressal laws, all kinds of laws which follow on the Right to Information Act. Well, right to information, getting the information is not an end in itself. Will getting information end corruption? No, you have to have a stronger law. Will getting information redress your grievance? No, it doesn't have anything to say about it. It's been used for that purpose, but it doesn't on its own redress grievances. But is the person protected? The question that has been raised, is a person protected if he gives information which is embarrassing to some political leadership or big businessmen to have been given out? He's not. We don't have a Whistleblowers Act, but people are working in that direction. Civil society is working in that direction. And therefore, there is now a scope for a wider participation of young people, and I see a number of young people here who are also feeling rather happy about what I'm saying. So I would suggest that you now put your best foot forward and move towards ensuring that social consciousness also grows in this matter, so this law can be used. And as I've said in my note also, that simply having a law is not enough. The second phase is that you know you have such a law and can use it. And then working to ensure that it is used. And if it is used, as I mentioned, to the benefit, it is to the benefit of both the public and the government. And if all the persons sitting here and the people of India as a whole are the stakeholders and the owners of this law is unique in that fact. that people do not consider it necessarily a law. The reason why you've had these demonstrations and things, and the government has drawn back from actually changing the law, even though some changes, I might say, are still necessary, but I have not really pushed that point, because the government feels that it will offend certain sections of people. And offending certain sections of the electorate means you lose votes, so you don't change it. So this is the strength. Use it. And I will now leave to Aruna to answer the question regarding civil society. But Jen, would you like to mention something?
I just want to answer Harish Masan's question on higher defense organization. Harish, what exactly did you want to know? The
in defense forces. I try to say that the transparency in defense forces that you're looking for towards national security is actually lacking because we don't have a higher defense organization,
Okay.
because of the adhocism that prevails, and because we don't even have a security policy. I'd like to consider how it affects our national security.
Yeah. The business of higher defense management in India is an ongoing discussion in the Ministry of Defense. And one of the things which was recommended by the Subramaniam Committee, which went into the Kargil episode, was that we should have a Chief of Defense Staff. Now, for various reasons, the Chief of Defense Staff has still not been appointed. I know for sure that the former Defense Minister, Mr. Manohar Parrikar, who just resigned, was very keen on instituting this reform. But now he has moved out of the Ministry of Defense. We'll have to see who the next minister is and what his reaction to this appointment is going to be. But surprisingly, there has been a fair amount of opposition to the idea of a Chief of Defense Staff from within the services, because the Air Force and the Navy feel that because the Army is so much bigger, the Army is 1.2 million and the other two services are less than 200,000. So by the sheer size of the Army, the Chief of Defense Staff position will be usurped by the Army and the other two services will become subservient. So whether greater transparency will come about with the appointment of the Chief of Defense Staff, I cannot say at this point in time. But I agree with Harish that much of the goings on in the higher defense management, especially the military bureaucracy interaction, is quite opaque, quite opaque. The people down the line are not even aware of what is going on, and that needs to change. Coming to this point raised by this gentleman here about the cultural change and what Mr. Habibullah said, the point is the government today does not view the RTI Act as a tool for two-way communication. Because the whole system is so corrupt, the government is terribly defensive. The moment an RTI application comes, the reaction is, oh my God, how do we waffle around? How do we protect ourselves? So that is something which can only change if there is far greater participation by civil society in enforcing the act. Otherwise, as the question which one gentleman asked, will the RTI Act vanish in 10 years, is a possibility. And it is for us, all of us, to take up the cudgel and make sure that we force the government to implement the act in the way it was meant to be. Thank you.
Actually, there's a question about the OGP, but I'm going to ask Nikhil to answer that, because we've both gone to represent India in one sense in the committee that was set up by the OGP. India withdrew, but we remained in that committee. So, Nikhil?
The OGP, I'll just very quickly say it's an open government partnership. It's a multilateral, international, voluntary organization where governments have said they will sign up to certain standards of open governance. India was supposed to be one of the 9 original countries, but very quickly withdrew because India does not like to be held to account on certain things in international fora. And that again comes to similar questions on what we are as a nation, how confident we are as a nation, how much we are really willing, the power, people in power, because it's not that you have to answer foreigners, but it has to be that you are willing to hold to the same standards as every other country around the world. And two successive governments, the UPA and the NDA, both have refused to be part of where India ranks amongst the highest in open governance, but is not willing to be accountable. So that's in a nutshell. If we can take three more, and then I think we have a little bit of those who, because
this is, it's on, no? Probably addressed to Aruna. Aruna, when you started out, there was more or less a good deal of respect for facts, and for many years after that. But we seem to have entered an era when there's this alternate truth and emotion seems to matter. How, in what way have you all thought of? Now, you work in the field with people, giving them information. Now, what, have you thought of any way in which or have you changed your strategies to counter the new environment that we all seem to have entered into?
after, yeah, please. That's working. Yeah. You speak, it will start working.
Acha? Okay, thank you. This is Hemant. I am a farmer from a village. I am going to take you to another side of the life. India looks like an open field for the gene robbers. And the gene robbers, they rob both the parental lines, mother and stock, both. And if they hide behind the umbrella of a patent act, how would we use the RTI? Would RTI would be enough without the quasi-judicial powers? How would we deal with this great menace?
I just had one comment to the RTI, the RTI national security. It's not a contradiction. It's really it's what we need in our lives. But more than anything, I think there's a movement to displace RTI, as I heard from various people, and I think it's in all our duty to keep it alive as long as we can, and pass the baton on to the next generation. Thank you.
I think that's a powerful, we'll hear last comments from all three, and then there's a vote of thanks which my mother will give. So, Vajat sir, start.
अभी एक जो आपका सवाल था genetic material ये जो है, this has already come. When I was Chief Information Commissioner, the matter already had come before me, and I had ruled that this information has to be given out, because the law itself talks about an overriding public interest, even on all those matters which I had said do not get disclosed, and this would fall in that category. Patent is commercial confidence. Therefore, it specifically mentions that patents and things cannot be disclosed. But there's a public interest override. And so under the Right to Information Act, आपको मदद इसमें अवश्य मिल सकती है. The law provides for it. But I think that there are no other points that, the point that was made, of course, that yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with you that any effort, I may not agree that yes, the governments are keen on dismantling it. The government is not a monolith. There are people within the government, after we were all in the government, and there are many people inside the government who would like to see the RTI be more effective. There are also people inside the government who don't want it to be more effective. So your job as citizens and as a vested interest in the continuation of the RTI Act means that you work with those who inside government who are interested in promoting it and discourage those who are not, who are interested in actually compromising it. And this can have its repercussions in various acts of political action which you take, and every citizen of India does something, even if you don't go and cast your votes, there's certain political activity in which we all are involved. So in that you can make this clear. So that I think is the way to go as far as preserving the act. And once, if the government in authority knows the public is solidly behind the act, no government is going to have the courage to start working and compromise, as we've seen in the last attempts at amendment. Even with the present government, they have not moved in that direction because of the fact they felt it would anger the public. Thank you.
And actually, Lakshmi, there are two kinds of information, and what we started doing is still very important, because there are facts when relating to, say, for mining, diseases that are now caused by mining, new sets of issues that have arisen, including displacement, which has been a pernicious state of affairs. Facts from government files get you more than perhaps you would first get recognized that you exist. Second thing is that your issue is tabled. And thirdly, depending on the facts that you unearth, you get some justice. What you and I are really concerned about is opinions. And these opinions are now being built on manufactured facts. Now that's another debate. It's not an RTI debate. It's a much larger political debate in which we have to argue out why Akbar was not a terrorist or not an extremist, why Akbar was actually great, or why Nehru should not be in the textbooks in Rajasthan. Nehru, there's only one line about Nehru in the textbooks, that he was the first Prime Minister of India. The rest of it has been expunged. RTI has been expunged from the textbooks. Now that debate is really going to be on a different kind of information that we cull out and place before people, and that is not strictly under the RTI Act, but the RTI Act can be used for that as well. So the RTI is actually an act which has been used by diverse kinds of people in this country. So for the poor and fighting poverty and fighting injustice, it's still extremely useful. For fighting also for women's issues, whether it's doctors' reports or whether it is, the conditions in which they're kept, it's extremely useful. For discrimination, it's still very useful. But for some of the other issues that are now cropping up, we need to sharpen our tools. And I think we'll have to do a lot of very planned and sharp questions that we raise to bring out information relevant to our arguments. And I think that may have to come from different parts of the government. And so we'll have to decide where we are going to get that information from to prove that it's authentic. So looking at history, science, the various attacks that are taking place and the rewriting of textbooks takes us completely into a different realm, which is making public opinion. And of course the control over media, where we are quite helpless. Are we going to set up alternate media? Are we going to have, in fact, I just read yesterday, I think, in the internet, that some alternative systems have come up even for daily news. So maybe we'll have to look at all the alternatives there and look at the tools that we can sharpen for that battle.
One of the things which bothers me personally is that people who are very active in the RTI sector, a lot of RTI activists are there who have culled out a lot of information from government. Many of them have been killed, and therefore there's a bill called the Whistleblowers Act, which is hanging fire somewhere. It's not being enacted into law. Now, even if it is enacted into law, it is up to the police thana, the local police thana, to provide the security which is required for that particular person. So, while passing the Whistleblowers Act as step one, how does it percolate down to the lowest level where the actual business of providing security is going to happen? So, at the moment, the lives of RTI activists are in danger. And we have any number of cases where people have lost their lives. So, I hope the Whistleblowers Act gets passed and instructions from the government of the day trickle down to the lowest level so that security is provided to RTI activists. And then only will the RTI movement gain strength. And as Wajahat said, that it is for civil society to make sure that the good points of the act are pushed forward and the negative points are, sidelined. And the government has to be convinced that it's a two-way communication tool and not become defensive the moment they see an RTI application because they want to hide something. Thank you.
So I just because this point is so interestingly poised as the core of this particular discussion and debate, the whistleblower bill has been passed, so it is in fact an act. It has not been notified. And there are sets of amendments that this government has brought in, both of two sets which will completely destroy whatever is in that act. One which says that anyone who reveals anything, a whistleblower is someone who's revealing wrongdoing. Anyone from the national security scenario who reveals anything that's going wrong cannot reveal it, will get no protection under the act. So that's the core of this whole discussion today, in a sense, that how will you have national security if wrongdoing even cannot be discussed to do with that, because it's something from within the system. And the second is even worse. The second set of amendments saying the only information that a whistleblower can reveal is what someone can seek under the RTI Act. So what is the point then of the Whistleblower Act at all, if you have that amendment? So that is where we need to be aware of what is happening and how things are being eaten up. And I think institutions should hold meetings on the Whistleblower Act, what's happening, on the Lokpal, what's happening, why it's not being notified. So anyway, thank you for, I think it's really important what we've heard, the beginnings of today, because many more such discussions need to take place. So I'd like to invite you all to really give all three, Wajahat Saab especially, but the other two also a hand, and both Aruna and Air Marshal Philip Rajkumar as well, along with Mr. Wajahat Habibullah. And I'd like to now call my mother, Marshal Dey, to give a vote of thanks, and there are a few small token things that are being given. So, on behalf.
Nikhil and Aruna are insisting that I participate, since it's also the family who's invited all of you here along with the School for Democracy. First of all, Mr. Wajahat Habibullah, thank you very, very much for coming at such short notice and so happily to come and deliver this lecture today. I'm sure Babi, wherever he is, my husband, would feel very honored that a lecture like this is being held in his name. Marshal Rajkumar, thank you very much for also participating and giving your ideas and the answers to all the questions. And Aruna, of course, you're a part of it, but always very, for all of us, always we listen to you with great interest and enjoy listening to you. I would also like to thank the IIHS and Mr. Aroma and all his people who as usual have done everything, the lighting, the sound, the space itself. At this, you know, Aruna insisted that this happened this year. I would like to mention here, definitely, that my daughter, who would have loved to be here, and my son-in-law, and my younger grandson, unfortunately, are not here today. But on their behalf, I'm also welcoming all of you and saying that they could not come because it was all happened so quickly. And that is why I'm saying that Aruna insisted that the continuity go on and it not stop. She says so many memorial lectures fall by the wayside, so this must continue. And next year, the whole family will definitely be here. Thank you very much for making your facilities available to us. What would we have done without this lovely space? And thank all of you for being here today with us. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did and learned from all the very informative statements made by Mr. Habibullah, Aruna, also Raj. I think it's got us all thinking, and we shall continue to think along the lines you have suggested. And as you had said, we have to have a cultural change. I think we have to begin ourselves and then continue from there and let it grow. So we'd just like to give these few things. Oh, there is this little piece that Babi wrote with Raj. Will you read it? Because my throat is this last paragraph. Aruna thinks everyone should hear.
This is what Marshal Dey has written. What is to be done? The answer is simple. Ask questions and start a nationwide informed debate on a variety of important defense-related issues. Make the government participate and respond in a manner that satisfies the public. There are a very large number of issues fit for an informed, constructive debate aimed at making sure that the money, resources, and lives that are expended in the defense of our nation are worth the sacrifice. It is questions such as these that need adequate answers and a critical appraisal and debate by a range of experts and students of military science who are not limited to a few select members of the establishment.
As a token of appreciation, the Dey family and the School for Democracy would like to give a small thing, it looks large, to Wajahat and to Raj. No, I'm an organizer, so I don't get anything. But anyway, thanks to everybody, and we hope we'll meet again next year. Thank you very much.